Welcome, everyone, to the Workforce Navigator Podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host. And today we have a really enlightening conversation with Stephanie Cramer. Now, Stephanie, you run talent, and I'm going to let you talk a little bit about yourself and what you're doing at Ironbow Technologies. But I wanted to say a couple of things about what we're here today to talk about. We all know that the best results is starting with the end in mind and then kind of working back. And how do we do that? How do we do that in our jobs, in our business? How do we design ultimately business success by defining what that success is and then working back? How do we as talent and HR professionals utilize that end goal to better accomplish what we're trying to do to acquire the right talent, create the right high performance teams, the right employee engagement that turns into, I know you're passionate about this, turns into great client engagement, overall growth of the business. In fact, you've written articles in Forbes before about talent and recruitment with empathy. You are very passionate about the employee experience, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about that today. And we share a passion about you grew up on a farm, and I'm raising my kids on a farm, so we connected that way too. If you wouldn't mind explaining a little bit more about your role here at the company and what the company does, and then we'll jump right into the meat of the subject.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, Steve. I'm super excited about this topic, as I know you are too. But yes, as you mentioned, Stephanie Cramer, I lead talent acquisition for Ironbow Technologies, and we're headquartered in Northern Virginia, Herndon, which is a suburb of DC, but we specialize in technology solutions. We're a next gen solution provider and have really diversified our portfolio. We focus on the government, DoD, commercial, and healthcare sectors. So really excited to be here and to talk about backing into those business metrics.
Well, let's just start out right from the beginning here. Talk about metrics and measurement and why you think that's so important to have those defined up front, what we're trying to measure, what kind of metrics are we looking at before we actually start to do any of the work.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a very broad question. It's going to vary depending on the company and what you're focusing on. I don't think there's one right answer. It's not like we can get it right and then you can stamp that out and apply it to every company out there. But I could not agree more that you have got to start with the end goal in mind. You need to know what your North Star is. And I run recruiting. How is it that that North Star is going to trickle down and even impact the talent that we're bringing in? Well, if we know what that North Star is, we're not going to get tunnel vision. We're not going to focus just solely on what it is that hiring manager is looking for. We're going to keep the broader picture in mind. So again, we're designing solutions that can truly impact the bottom line.
And that means that you're looking at data in the ways that we haven't in the past. Tell me a little bit about why data is important and how do you utilize it in running talent for the company?
Absolutely. So for us, again, data is everything. It's not going to dictate the overall decision, but it is an element that creates an overall data informed decision. And when it comes to talent strategy, we are capturing metrics at every stage of the game. We have metrics on our talent pipeline, metrics to even down to how long our candidates are in each stage of that pipeline. We have metrics when it comes to onboarding, what is truly moving the needle, and we're iterating on those every single day. I think one of the challenges that people, or mistakes rather, that people can get into is thinking that those metrics are static and not need to be iterated on. They need to be iterated on, they need to be visited often. We're coming together at a minimum quarterly to review all of our metrics. And again, figuring out what we need to tweak, what we need to lean into. And it's proven successful so far.
So, in terms of metrics, I always like to think about this in terms of a story because everything you said there makes perfect sense. But I know that you're very, very passionate about employee engagement. And employee engagement is directly related to the culture that you create inside of the company. So, is there things about engagement and culture that are a part of the metrics that you're tracking? Give us an idea, a story about how those metrics drive engagement and create company culture, whether it's a story from an employee or anything you want. But how do you paint the picture for us in terms of how important these are?
Yeah. Let me start by saying Iron Bow is by no means perfect. We are constantly evolving and trying to improve. Again, you're never going to get it right out of the gates for us. Again, we're always iterating, but I personally believe in those pulse surveys that are going out to employees often. We can't just automatically assume that what was good in January is going to be good in September. And one of the things that we are constantly monitoring is just that pulse, how employees are feeling, their sentiment. And it's hard to, how do you take sentiment and turn that into data? But it's really just as simple as it sounds 1 to 5. How are you feeling? I don't want to oversimplify things. Again, Iron Bow talking about this, it's not something we've officially rolled out, but I'm a huge advocate of it. We're doing that in talent acquisition and pre boarding and onboarding, and it's been successful so far making those surveys on candidates and new hires, and we want to roll it out further. So it's evolving and being able to just say, okay, 1 to 5, where are you at? And then, of course, leaving a comment to be able to take in not just the quantitative, but the qualitative as well. I wish I had a better answer for you, but we're again trying to simplify things.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think if you could further paint the picture for us for how it directly relates to different stages. So in talent acquisition, how does this help tracking sentiment, tracking these metrics? How does this help in hiring better talent, contributing to better high performance teams, like the sentiment and things you're talking about? So I'm not sure everybody does that with candidates. So you're getting information there and you're utilizing that. How does it help support your overall goal of creating, attracting better, higher quality talent, and therefore better, higher quality, high performance teams?
Well, as it relates to talent acquisition, every single touch point that a candidate has with our team, with our tools, with our applicant tracking system is an unconscious data point that that candidate is forming in the back of their mind to create a narrative about company. So having sentiment about that overall process is really helpful because we want to ensure that we're imparting solid knowledge about Bow, because at the end of the day, how we make hiring decisions, even as something as simple as how quickly we can respond, how quickly we can come back with good feedback, and how quickly we're moving them along in the process, lends credence to how we make decisions as a company. So being able to have that sentiment and knowing what they're feeling externally, Bow is incredibly helpful. So again, constantly monitoring that, because talent acquisition, we're at the front of the process. And in our interaction, we're creating the lens through which they're going to judge their entire time, their engagement, their employee experience at Ironbow. So we need to do all that we can to make sure that that lens is clear and that lens is accurate. And we have our act together.
So I'd like to just point out our goal here of this podcast is how do we start with the end in mind and work back? Like, what do we want as a success? So I've talked to a lot of HR and talent professionals about employee engagement. This is the first time that I've heard somebody talk about employee engagement starts at the candidate level. And right, your company is a brand. These are touch points with the brand. You're trying to build trust with them. You're trying to talk to them about this is the kind of place they want to work because they're interviewing you as much as you're interviewing them. So there's another great goal. How do we create an environment where they want to choose us? And that starts in that process and it goes all the way through then the employee engagement, which means better retention, better engagement scores, which then translates to more client engagement and success overall. So I love how you're weaving this story and that you're focusing not only on data and metrics, but just the experience that you want to create at all levels. So the idea of create individuals creating high performance teams, you had an approach that you liked from David. Was it Hammerhand that you wanted to talk a little bit about? I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so David Hanrahan, a fantastic people leader, started early in his career at Electronic Arts, moved to Twitter, Zendesk, Eventbrite, and now he's the SVP of People Success at SolarWinds. And he believes that individual performance is important. You need to be able to get clarity and ensure that you are really clear to your employees about what success is, that people know what their North Star is and how they need to operate. But what's interesting is that he believes that the individual performance doesn't do much when you're talking about the overall company performance. And he believes that it's all about team performance. And how is it that we can dial in what makes a successful team, pick it apart, and figure out what we need to do to empower our people leaders, our managers, to get the most out of their teams. So it can be as simple as coming together as an executive team and stack ranking them. Like, what is it that makes one team better than another team? And it's going to be different depending on the function that that team is providing. But it's really being able to have those honest conversations and being clear about that. It's a really cool way to think about overall performance management. And both the individual and team element needs to be there, in my opinion.
It's a good expression. If your goal to achieve success is based on individual metrics, then you backtrack and that will lead to then individual criteria and programs and enhancements and workflows and everything. If your goal is team success, it brought up something that was really interesting. And I don't know if he recommends this or not, but all companies do individual performance reviews. Do we do individual team reviews? If that's what's most important.
Yeah, it depends on what you're doing with that information. Again, starting with the end goal in mind. What is it we're trying to accomplish? And I think maybe not sharing that at the individual level, but definitely sharing that with the managers of those teams so that they can understand like what's working well. You might have a team full of incredible, high performing athletes, but if they're not working together as a team, what good is that going to do you?
Absolutely. That's like the end of the year performance for you. I've done that with my teams, with my clients. Like, hey, together, did we accomplish what we want to do? Where did we do well? Where did we not? And then that helps plan and backtrack to plan out what you want to do in the future. So we understand there's the metrics, the data, setting the goals for what you really want to achieve success, team versus metric. But what I want to know is the leaders in the organization. What's their role in creating success? Is it communicating well so that all the individual teams know where the company is headed and what's the 5-year plan and things like that so that we can all backtrack as a part of the engine that's driving that? How do you see the role of leaders in creating the success?
I think you need to practice what you preach. It starts with communication, being clear and transparent. I believe that in the absence of information, it's human nature. You're going to create your own narrative, and it's more oftentimes way worse than what the actual story is. So just being super clear with communication and then practicing what you preach. I think culture and success, I don't think it can be decreed. I don't think it can be an edict that says go forth and be successful. Culture and I believe company success happens in the small moments with consistency over time. So not trying to boil the ocean, but again, practicing what you preach in those small moments and being consistent across the board with who you're talking to and the meetings that you participate in. If you think about it as this overall massive challenge, how is it that we get business success and create good culture and engagement? You're just going to get overwhelmed and you're going to get caught up in focusing on things that aren't going to prove the action and the value that you want. Breaking it down, thinking about, okay, well, how's today going to work? And what am I going to accomplish this week? Breaking it down into bite sized chunks and just always having that North Star in mind. Again, probably an oversimplification, but I believe that simplifying things is where it's at.
Well, here's a typical challenge in accomplishing that. Not all leaders are great at communicating. So, what's your role as a talent professional if your leaders aren't communicating that, but that North Star is really that important? And here's the other aspect of it is that unfortunately, many times we can still be considered not a vital contributor to the overall success of the business, but a support function of the success of the business where we know that people drive business. So our talent acquisition strategies in creating high performance teams directly impact the overall growth of the business. So if you're not being perceived in that light and that importance, sometimes that means you're not also getting the feedback or the direction from leadership that you need. How do you break through that? How do you make sure you understand that North Star? You understand where the company's going. So therefore, how we can help create the right high performance teams to accomplish.
That's a really good question. How do you break into that? I've had conversations with my management, my leadership, and I'm fortunate that they do understand how it does need to be whittled down. And when you understand what that North Star is, then you can understand how that team operates. And then you can break that down into your skills that hiring needs. But how do you break into that? To answer your question, being clear and consistent and communicative with your leadership, bringing elements of your function to them and bringing data and just asking them, being honest and connecting the dots for them to explain this is how I see our function being able to help and impact the overall business. Help me help you. And at the end of the day, just asking those simple questions. I think you said a little bit ago, you'd be hard pressed to find someone that isn't going to hear that and want to lean in and answer that question for you to make sense of it all.
So if we could put a framework around all of this, like a backtrack framework, what do you think are the elements that we need to think about in order to have the knowledge of where we're going to translate it all the way into our day-to-day strategies and tactics and implementation?
I believe, again, that having the cadence set up and the data there so that you're coming together, you're not going to get it right out of the gates. And I think that you really need to hold on to that because the data that you track is going to quickly tell you your mark. When we were redesigning, overhauling, onboarding, I had come up with metrics because we had several problem statements at the beginning of the process. And we tried to think about what we were solving for and create the metrics to satisfy that. And once we started iterating and we were 3 months, 6 months into the process, it was clear to us what metrics allowed us to really understand where we needed to focus and what metrics needed to be tossed. I don't think there is a perfect framework to back into that other than, again, just getting out there and starting. Because once you start tracking that and reviewing it, you'll be able to see what's adding value and what's detracting from that. So I think the framework and the success is in the process and the iteration.
So I want to divert just a little bit and ask you about a topic on company culture. And we've talked about it in terms of what's the culture of candidates that are coming in and what are they feeling and how do they feel about the brand and that relationship that's starting at that point. Obviously, then how that transitions into employee engagement. Employee engagement, in a lot of respects, is about fostering the right culture that supports them, makes them feel like they're an important contributor to the company. Basically, it's like the NPS score of an employee. Like they would refer others and say, "This is a great place to work. You should want to work here too. Here's why." How important is creating culture?
It's like an age old question. Can you create culture or does it evolve organically? I think that if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. That iterative approach that I was just telling you about before, I think you need to start out with a goal. You need to start out with tracking something and coming together often to review that. We took the time to create a culture key where we sat down and worked with marketing and executive leadership to put in the paper to say, who is it that we are? Because at the end of the day, we're not everyone's cup of tea, and with good reason. I didn't coin this. A person, I just quoted her a little bit ago on LinkedIn, so you have to see my post to Ariana. She said that your culture needs to be more of a filter than a magnet. And I couldn't agree more because not everyone is going to thrive and be successful at Ironbow at any company. So you need to be able to be clear on what your culture is and what makes you successful as a company so that you're filtering those people in. So back to your original question, do you create that or does it evolve organically? That culture key for us is a North Star and it keeps us accountable. So I think it's not yes or no. I think it's and. I think you capture that vision of what you want to be. And just like the data you need to iterate on it, come together. Is this still who we are? But that's a good question.
So we've already talked about a lot. What haven't we talked about yet? That from your perspective, running talent in the whole talent organization, that goes back to how do we backtrack into our company success? What haven't we talked about yet that you would want to make sure that was made clear on the podcast?
I don't think this is something that hasn't been discussed already, but I do want to make sure that it's heard and that it's taken home. Being able to take that North Star and translating that down into how it impacts your team specifically from that talent acquisition perspective, being able to understand what makes the teams that we're supporting be high performance teams, not necessarily like, okay, what is it that you want individually in a person that we're hiring, but what is it that the team needs in order to be overall successful? What creates that high performing team? Taking that and distilling that down into competencies because it does translate down to the individual level. But thinking about how you're going out externally to find those people to satisfy that team is key. You can't go out to chase stars. Football, you can't go out and just recruit an incredible quarterback and expect your football team to win the Super Bowl. It really needs to come in to be able to understand how they play a part of a team. So being able to take that and even discuss it during the interview process, I think is something that we don't do enough of.
Well, this is my last question, and it might parallel with your answer there. But if there was only one thing that you wanted people to take away from this podcast, because the human brain, we can't remember everything. So you said, boy, Steve, this is the one thing I really want them to take away. What would that be?
Yep. Just do it. At the end of the day, when it comes to being able to track data and have data informed decisions, I think we can get overwhelmed quickly with trying to figure out where to start. Oh, we have to get it perfect. No, you're not going to get it perfect. Just accept that and just start. You'll quickly learn what's working and what's not. You'll understand what you need to develop more of, and you'll quickly learn what data and metrics you need to toss. But just starting and coming together to review that and great is where it's at.
Well, I know people are going to have questions after watching this. Would it be appropriate that we give out maybe a link to your LinkedIn profile that people can reach out to you?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm definitely not the end all be all expert, but I love talking about this stuff. I think that there's always growth to be done in these conversations. So, yes, please have people reach out.
Well, great. Well, Stephanie, thank you so much for coming on today. It's our ability to want to share and share our insights and our perspectives. That if we can all do that, we can bring it together here. It's like the rising tide that lifts all boats. So I appreciate you being a part of that rising tide today.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's a great subject. I've enjoyed being here.